assuming we're here because I think we did all the Amalek related stuff. We did not being afraid of our enemies. You know what? Just to go back to this for a second. Before the trip, we were doing this and we were talking about not being afraid and what it means to be afraid. And it was one of the things that was just repeated over and over again by people who were telling stories about October 7th and other war stories since then, about how one after another of the Israeli soldiers just ran in to combat or fire or to save people. It was a continuous story. I didn't hear one person, and these weren't just like official spokesmen. These were people that were with us, my friends talking about their kids and stuff like that. I didn't hear one story of somebody who hesitated about going into battle. There was one guy on our trip, a guy named Sruli, who he came on as part of the staff. He was like a logistics guy, and he had just gotten out of he was in Lebanon. He had just gotten out of Lebanon just shortly before then. And so he came on as a logistics guy, and he told us a story about his closest friend who we visited this kibbutz called Kfar Aza. And so the story is that his friend and some other guys entered Kfar Aza on that day, on October 7th, when the Arabs are first attacking in there. And the story was that he and this other guy were wounded while they're engaging with the Arabs who had infiltrated, and then they got separated. So as far as he knew about his friend, the last known contact with him was this other guy who had been wounded and eventually was evacuated. And the guy said he doesn't know what happened to him. They were both wounded, and they got separated, and then they never found out. And so they had a drone flying over, and the drone had images of this man's body. So this is his best friend, who's now confirmed dead. But they knew nothing of what happened, of sort of his last moments there. And this young man who died had a girlfriend, and so this guy really, was in contact with her, and they went through the whole, process. And I don't know how long it took, but at some point, somebody posted on one of the social media sites that they were in this kibbutz, Kfar Aza. They were in the youth part of the kibbutzes, which is where the Arabs concentrated their attack. And they were pinned down by maybe 10 Arabs who were shooting at them. And there were like these clouds. The way the guy described it, there were like there was like clouds of smoke and debris, and then this young soldier came rushing out through the clouds, and he said the only way I can describe it is like an angel of God came through. The guy had a pistol, and he said with his pistol, he shot 6 of the people that were, that had them under, that pinned them down. And he was taking fire from the guys who were pinning them down, and he collapsed, but they ran. The rest of the people ran, and they were spared. So, but based on the description and the timing, they figured out that it was his friend who had been wounded, just sort of apparently just rushed through when he heard the gunfire, and he died saving these people. So he tells this story when we're at Kfar Aza, and then a few days later, we're somewhere. Forgot where we were. And he's talking, you see him talking sort of excitedly with somebody, and he comes back and he said, that I just met the guy who put up that post for the first time, about this whole thing that happened, that they just happened to bump into each other, and he figured out this is the guy who put up the post. So there were like stories, one after another of stories. There was this other guy, Ronen, who was just part of the Israeli group that we were with. The trip had Israelis on it who were, they were on the trip for themselves, because part of this trip is to inspire a kind of religious connection to Israel, not just, a historical, political one. And so they're on this trip for themselves, but they're also there so that other people on the trip can get to know Israelis. Because if you're on a tour, you're going from one place to another, you don't necessarily get to interact with Israelis, and they wanted people to get that opportunity. So these guys had kind of a double purpose. This guy, Ronen, who was just part of that group, who's a 49-year-old guy. I forgot where he lives. Who, when we were at Nova, he for the first time shared that he was at Nova. They didn't know about this on the trip. They would have, of course, had him officially speak to us, but he was just there, and he just started telling the story, and everybody gathered around, that he was with a unit of about 10 guys who heard there was something going on in the South, but they didn't know what it was, and they just got in their vehicles and they started heading down, as soldiers to help, when a car approached them and stopped them, on the road, and told them that there's something going on at Nova. Like people, a lot of, it wasn't that well known, this concert that was happening, and people didn't really know. And this guy told them there's something going on at Nova, and that there's shooting and all this. So he and another guy from the 10 went with the guy in the car. So they're just 2 soldiers with the guy in a car. He drives them to Nova. This guy Ronen and another guy rush into Nova, and they're on this scene where there's bodies everywhere and there's shooting going on, and they spend the day, trying to get people out, like one by one. And so he was on this trip talking about, that was the first time he shared it in public, that this experience that he had. These were the kind of things that you were hearing about over and over, about people that rushed in. There was another guy at Nova who was not a soldier. He was just, he was from a yishuv that was like 4 kilometers away from Nova. I forgot the name of the yishuv. And they started to get WhatsApp messages. This was one of the crazy things for me, that almost all the communication that was happening between the soldiers, between civilians and the soldiers was all happening on WhatsApp, which, and then some guy told me afterwards that in a weird way, WhatsApp is a very secure way to communicate because apparently it's encrypted. These messages are encrypted. So it's not easy to break in to somebody, I guess, to listen in on what's going on. But anyways, so they got a message via WhatsApp that there are people hiding in a field a few kilometers away and that there's craziness going on at Nova. So this guy and his father-in-law, they drove a pickup truck out to where they described they were, and they find there's like 30 people there. So they put like some wounded people in the pickup truck, and they drive off back to his yishuv, his community, and the guy that was left over, his name was Aaron, I think. It was Ronan and Aaron, I think the other guy's name was. No, not Aaron. I don't remember what the other guy's name was. So this guy was talking to us, and so he said he started walking the people. You couldn't go on the roads because the Arabs were on the road, and they were killing everybody on the roads, just shooting people up. They had commandeered what was really like a highway and had total control of it. So they were like walking through the fields, but they had WhatsApped their community, and so people from their community were coming towards them. They were walking, and then the people from their community took the people who had been hiding back to where they were, and then some of them went back with that truck to the area around Nova, and again through WhatsApp, where people were communicating about where they were, and they were picking people up, taking them back, picking people up, taking them back throughout the day. And in the end, that group of people from that yishuv saved 750 people that had escaped into the woods. There were hundreds and hundreds of people were killed and raped and taken hostage, as we know. But there were hundreds of people that were saved. And again, they were just like going into the most dangerous places, going into fire. You hear about it one time after another time after another time. And this thing about not being afraid in the face of dealing with your enemy, we were reading about it. I was reading about it in such a detached way. This mitzvah number 58. That he prohibited us from being afraid of the enemies during the time of war, that we not run away from them. Rather, it's an obligation upon us to be resilient and stand firm and be strong against the other people. Anyone who retreats and runs away is transgresses negative commandment. Like, I didn't hear one story. I'm sure there's somewhere, but this notion that one time after another, you're just hearing stories of people that are just rushing in. When I was at Sderot by the police station, they have this video of this car. They have they've set up the police station at Sderot they laid siege to it. The Arabs laid siege to it, and they're firing on it, and they're very well armed, and they have grenades and rocket-propelled grenades and lots of machine guns and lots of ammunition, and they just lay siege to the police department. At one point, this car, you see audio video. They have like an audio video set up there so you can get a feel for what was going on when this was going on. And you see this car drive up next to the police station. It's a father, his 6-year-old daughter, and a baby in a car seat. And clearly the father was hoping that if he got to the police station, they'd be safe. But the police station was under siege. And you can hear like the bullets hitting the car. And the police inside are they want to get to the car, but there's no way that the bullets are flying. There's like an injured paramedic, who's outside the building, not terribly far from the car. But again, it was like at first there's no way they're going to get to the car, and then at some point somehow they do. Like, I think the paramedic and one policeman get to the car. By then the father was killed, and you just have this 6-year-old girl in the back seat with her baby sister, and you can hear on the audio the girls going, "Atem Israel, are you from Israel?" And in other words, "Are you Israelis?" The girl's saying, and they go, "Yes, yes." And she goes, and then she goes, take us, and then the girl tells them that her sister's in the car with them, and it's just this most pathetic. It's just they do rescue her, but the idea that this girl's father is dead right near her, and she's like worrying about saving her sister, and all this is going on when there's gunfire in the background. But these guys who rushed, to save her, and it's just like a story repeated over and over and over again. So these words mean something completely different to me today. Just sending this my son, just sending him a quick text. So yeah. All of these mitzvahs, not forgetting a molek and all these things. Okay, here we go. Mitzvah number 60, negative commandment number 60. That he prohibited us from cursing the great God. May he be greatly exalted from that which the sectarians say. So what does that mean? In Hebrew, the way they translate it into Hebrew is Mimasha Yomru Haminim Olui Rav. So the minim are heretics. I don't know about the choice of the word minim here for the Hebrew. The word min can mean a kind of heretic. It, in some cases, means early Christians, but it's hard for me to believe that would be the early Christians, because the early Christians still maintain a belief in God and they wouldn't curse God. So I don't know specifically what he's referring to here, but you're not allowed to curse God. And that is the matter that has been called blessing God may be exalted. Now, the reason they use that word blessing God instead of cursing God, because even the term cursing God itself carries with it such explosive character. So this is using a form that's sometimes called Lashon Sagi Nahor, which literally means the language of full of light. So Sagi Nahor is the way, the Talmudic way of referring to a blind person. They refer to a blind person as full of light. It's a kind of ironic use of an opposite. It has deep meaning too, in its sense, like a poetic deep meaning, but it begins as a kind of ironic opposite. And so, especially when it comes to using terms that themselves carry with them such weight that they will switch to its ironic opposite. And so they use blessing God instead of cursing God, because they don't even want to just say those words. They'd rather just say blessing God. The punishment for one who transgresses this commandment is indeed explicit in the Torah, that he is stoned. and that is his may be exalted, saying, and he who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death, and all the congregation shall surely stone him. So that's talking about the person who cursed God, and that story is in the Torah portion of Emor, maybe. He is the son of Shalomis Bas Divri. His father was an Egyptian. There's not a lot of backstory that's given about this in the Torah. The Medrash fills it out that he was subject to a lot of name calling and treated in a demeaning way because his father was an Egyptian. And then at some point he just curses God. So it seems like the motivation is to show ultimate disrespect to God. That's why the person's doing it. It would be the equivalent of spitting in somebody's face. You're trying to demean somebody, to denigrate somebody to the depths of what you know how. So the most demeaning denigration that a person could do to God, that's what this is. And that's why, and therefore the punishment is that they are stoned. However, regarding the prohibition, behold that no verse came that is specific to this content by itself. Rather, it came with a prohibition that includes this content and besides it. And that is, he said, do not curse powers, Elohim. Now, in other words, there is a separate prohibition. What he means is, this is told as a story in the context of a story about that guy. It is told what he did and what Moshe was told to do to him because of what he did. But there's not a separate, what he's saying here is there's not a separate so it says it came with a prohibition that includes this content and that besides it. So there's a broader prohibition that this is included in. That's what the Rambam seems to be saying. There's a broader prohibition, and this is included in it. And that is his saying, do not curse Elohim, which is in Shemot, in the Torah portion of Mishpatim. And in the explanation, they said, for the ineffable name with death, and for appellations with a prohibition. So, in other words, there is a broader prohibition of using God's name in a curse. So it's not simply, in our case, in the local case, which is the case that's mentioned about the one who curses God. In that case, he's directly cursing God. There is a broader prohibition, which includes just using God's name in a curse. Or you could be cursing other powers, you could be cursing the judges, you could be cursing people in power, but you're using God's name. In such a case, that is the prohibition that's included in Shemot. And in the Mechilta, it says, do not curse powers, is to give a prohibition for blessing God. The regulations of this commandment have been explained in the 6th chapter of Sanhedrin. You should know that this type of prohibition that includes 2 or 3 things need not be from the general negative commandments. For Scripture explained the punishment of each matter separately, so we know perforce that each matter was forbidden and that each is a negative commandment. And since it is a principle in the Torah that it only punishes for something if it has been prohibited, we will necessarily search for the prohibition. And sometimes it'll be derived from an analogy, and sometimes it'll be included in something else, as we've explained in principle. So what he's saying is that there are several things that end up being prohibited because of the Exodus, because of the Torah portion of Mishpatim section. The specific prohibition against directly cursing Hashem, that in order to punish somebody, you need there to be a warning. And what he's saying is, when we say there needs to be a warning, it doesn't necessarily, the warning doesn't have to be specific to the infraction. It can be from a general warning that covers more than one thing. The warning requirement can be a general thing or inferred from a general thing. It doesn't have to go through each subsection and have a separate warning for each subsection. So we know perforce that each matter was forbidden such that each is a negative commandment. And since it is a principle of the Torah that one only punishes for something if it is prohibited, in other words, where there was a warning, we will necessarily search for the prohibition. Sometimes it'll be derived from an analogy, sometimes it'll be included in something else, as we explain in Principle 14. It will, however, not be a general negative commandment unless no aspect of that which is prohibited by it be found in any place, and that was explained in Principle 9. However, when we have prior knowledge that we are prohibited from a thing, such as his saying, one who does this will have that done to them, we will not be particularly about the prohibition being explicit or in one of these two ways, or it being specific or general. And know this, Mishpati Mishpat Torah. So again, that's how I would characterize what he's saying. In other words, technically, you need to see the punishment written somewhere, and you need a separate place where it was warned against doing it in order to actually be able to carry out the punishment. In this case, the punishment is mentioned in the case of the specific instance of that guy. The prohibition is mentioned in another place, and even though that prohibition is more general and is a prohibition against several different things, it counts so that you could actually put somebody to death for cursing God. Now, I don't know if there were other cases in history. There may have been one in the Gemara. I don't remember offhand if there is another case, or were there many other cases of people that were put to death for this prohibition. I'm just going to see here. I don't know why they're referencing this particular commandment when he talks about this. They're referencing this chapter. Let's see. This is about a type of heresy where people believe in the one God, but they also worship the sun, the moon, and the stars as his emissaries, which is how the Rambam says idolatry started, and then eventually it got distorted and people started to see those emissaries as separate things. So the end of this is, the wise men among them would think that there is no God other than the stars and the spheres, for whose sake and in resemblance of which they made these things. The eternal rock was not recognized or known by anyone in the world, with the exemption of a few individuals, Chanoch, Mesushalah, Noah, Shem, and Aver. The world continued in this fashion until the pillar of the world, patriarch of Avram, was born. So they so he's characterizing the time before Abraham as a time when they no longer recognized the one God. They had lost sight of it because after generations, what began as recognizing the one God but serving other items as his emissaries led to them forgetting that behind it all was one God. This seems to be connected to how he started. He started with this idea where he said that he prohibited us from cursing the great God may be greatly exalted from that which the sectarians say. From that which the sectarians say. This must be related to that, why they're quoting this Rambam at the end. This has to be, you could just have somebody who's angry at God and he just decides to curse God. I don't know if this is like that thing, from that notion that those people said God died in the Holocaust. Is it that kind of thing? That making that kind of statement, would that amount to a curse of God to say something like that? Remember, there was a period of time my father got me a collection of Elie Wiesel's interviews, speeches, and some writings. It was a 3-volume set, and pretty consistently in interviews he'd be asked about it, because in Night he had that scene where there was a hanging in Auschwitz, and there was a boy hanging there, I guess, for stealing potatoes or whatever, and he said something, and God hung there that day on the gallows, some line like that. So the assumption that people made was that Elie Wiesel believed that notion that somehow God died in the Holocaust. And then he spent decades afterwards explaining that he doesn't believe that. That's not what he believes. He believes in a living God, and he's in dialogue with God. He's angry with God, but he's in dialogue with God. And I even had a back and forth with him a little bit about it. It was right when laptops were coming out, and I had this field day where I was just sending faxes to all these people. So I sent one to him saying, that the reason that they're asking you this all the time is because everybody's reading Night. And that is it possible that the only way he can really respond to this and make it clear that he does continue to believe in God and Torah and mitzvahs, he continued to believe in Torah and mitzvahs, he kept Shabbos and kashrus, etc., that would be to write another novel like Night, to write something in which he makes it clear in his writings, not just in interviews. And then he wrote back and he said, I have been trying to do that. And he said, I've written these books, they're not novels like Night, but he said his books about the patriarchs and his books about rabbinic figures, he's trying, he said it's, I'm trying to do that in my writing, but I'm wondering if that's part of what the Rambam's talking about, where you suggest that if that would amount to the kind of curse of God that the Rambam's talking to, because what does he mean when he says the meaning, the heretics, the sectarians that saying it, and then he brings up this thing here where they forget. Again, he's not bringing it up. The editor is saying, see Parshas Mishpatim Mishnah Torah, but they quote that section. All right. I look forward to learning with you tomorrow as we explore these profound topics. Thank you for sharing this with me.
I will miss you.
Okay. Be well. And I'm thinking of you. I will think about you all day today, and I will think about you all day tomorrow.
Well, maybe if they finish quickly, I can zoom in.
That would be hysterical. And then you'll tell me if it sounds differently. You'll tell me if it's.
You're being recorded. Liz can listen to you later.
Oh, that's right.
We can hint to things. It makes people curious and they'll never know. Okay. All right.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you,
Be well.
Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you.
Be well.
Goodbye.